Hello, good evening everyone. I feel like I'm a little bit out of focus this evening and my camera angle might not be exactly right, so let me adjust that. We're 1 minute before we're due to start, so I've got a bit of time to adjust this. Won't start till 7:30 and here we are. It's 7:30 and so we can begin. Try not to say it's good to see you because I can't see you. I hope you can see me and I hope that you can hear me. It'd be great if somebody would just put a little thumbs up for me so that I can know that you can hear me. If you can hear me, just give me a little bit of a thumbs up. That would be great. There we go. Thank you, brother. Glad to see that you're watching. There's a couple of things that I wanted to mention this evening. The first one is that we're doing everything that we can to keep in touch with people. As leaders, we're praying together. Weekly, we're getting together by Zoom chat and we're going through the list of everyone who is a regular attender and maybe some of those who are not so regular attenders or used to attend in the past. And we're going through and we're praying for everybody. And we're talking about where everybody's up to and making sure that one of us at least is in contact with everyone. So please be aware that we're praying for you, that you are in our hearts and you are in our prayers, including all the children. Please say hi to the children for me as well. I miss them. Also to let you know that there's a newsletter. We're in the middle of trying to produce a newsletter. So if you know anyone in particular, particularly those people who can't get on social media and use technology, who might appreciate a newsletter with a bit of an update of how people are doing and things to pray for, please let us know and we'll be able to get you a newsletter you can pass on to them, or we can just deliver it straight through their front door. That will be fine. And also please be in touch if you're aware of any needs that we need to be praying about. If you're aware of anything, anybody who needs any help, feel free to put it on the church WhatsApp group. Anybody who needs to be added to that group, or if you want to be added to it, please let us know. There are various ways that we're trying to keep in touch with people when we can't be social, when we have to be socially isolated from one another, physically at least, physically isolated. Really, we would love to be able to keep in touch with everyone through social media, through phone calls and all that kind of thing. So please just let us know one way or another if there's any need that you need us to be aware of, or somebody else does. I wasn't too sure that I was going to go here this evening in what we're going to be reading and what we're going to be studying, which is one of the reasons why those of you that are in the WhatsApp group will know that I added in mid-afternoon that we were going to be looking at Zephaniah. That was kind of almost to force me to do this, because Zephaniah is a difficult book. It's a difficult book to find for most of us, but it's far back from the end of the Old Testament. So if you've got a Bible, as I have, and you can find Zephaniah, you can find the end of the Old Testament, and you can just go back 4 books to Zephaniah, not Zechariah. Zechariah is the 2 after Zephaniah. So if you go 4 or maybe 5 back from the end of the Old Testament, you'll find the book of Zephaniah. And it's a short prophecy, but it's a very dark prophecy. And of course, we're living in dark days in many ways, days when we're not living life as we expect to. The Bible is full of prophecies and psalms and stories and prayers that are honest about the darkness, and Zephaniah is one of them. Habakkuk is another one. It's in a similar part of the Bible. Just before Zephaniah, you've got Habakkuk. That's another prophecy that tells you about the darkness that we live in our world. And so I'm going to go through Zephaniah. I'm not going to read it all at the beginning. We're just going to go pick out different bits. I would say highlights, but they're kind of lowlights mainly of the prophecy of Zephaniah. If you want to summarize the prophecy of Zephaniah in the Old Testament, then one word maybe would summarize it, and that's the word awesome. Awesome. It's a word that repeats a few times in these 3 chapters of this short prophecy. Awesome. Awesome is a bit of an overused word. It certainly was in the 1990s. If you remember the 1990s, you can remember almost everything was awesome, wasn't it? And then that got resurrected a little bit with the Lego movie, Everything is Awesome. And so you could have people going down for breakfast in the 1990s and they would find orange juice in their fridge and they would say, orange juice, awesome. Or cornflakes, oh, awesome, cornflakes for breakfast. Or if you knew any surfers, they would always seem to be talking about how awesome the waves were that they were catching that day on their boards. Probably an overused word that's lost its meaning to some degree. It certainly hadn't lost its meaning in Zephaniah's day. And God uses the word awesome. He puts the word awesome in Zephaniah's mouth to describe some really very awesome, or maybe we would say nowadays, awful things. And orange juice doesn't feature, and neither do cornflakes or surfing. So 3 awesome or awful things in this prophecy of Zephaniah that talks into very dark days in the history of God's people. And the first thing I want to notice is an awesome dystopia. An awesome dystopia. What on earth is a dystopia? Well, I've been having some great conversations with my boys over the last few weeks of lockdown, and learning a lot myself from what they learned at school. And one of the things a conversation I recently overheard between 2 of my children was a description of a dystopia. And I revisited with them today. And I said to the boys, what's a dystopia? And they said, a dystopia is a world that is crazy and savage, where everything is wrong and there's no good in anything. There's no structure or order in anything, like a wasteland with fire everywhere. But there doesn't have to be fire. And a place where there's factions. That's how they define a dystopia. Is that clear? A world where everything is crazy and savage, where everything is wrong, and it all seems to be going to the wrong place all the time. And wherever you think something might just be going right, suddenly it all collapses, and that's a dystopia. And the Zephaniah describes here an awesome or awful dystopia. One of my children, I won't tell you which one, said that Liverpool is a dystopia. But we won't go on to that too much this evening. I can neither confirm nor deny reports that Liverpool is a dystopia. I'm quite sure it isn't. But Zephaniah does report here a dystopia in the first couple of chapters. He paints this picture of a world where everything is going wrong. So this isn't awesome in a good way. It's normally the way awesome is used nowadays, but awesome can also mean in a negative sense. It can be awesome in a negative sense, full of awe in a fearful sense. You know, in the old days, the word awful could also be positive. Nowadays, we only use the word awful to mean something really, really quite breathtakingly horrible. But in the old days, awful could also mean breathtakingly positive, full of awe. And awesome, in the same way, can go either way. And so we have here an awesome dystopia, or an awful dystopia. And Zephaniah gives us this vision of a place where all that could be wrong is wrong. Everything seems to be going wrong. And that's kind of the picture we're living in today, isn't it? Wherever you look, it seems like things seem to be on the slide because of this lockdown that we're in. And Zephaniah paints this picture to the people of Israel, to his people, of this awful dystopia, this awful future. Zephaniah, the prophet, is speaking to the country of Judah in the south of Israel, the divided kingdom to the south. And it's after 50 years of wicked rebellion by God's people. And he paints this very dark picture. Have a look at chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. Here's the prophet Zephaniah reporting God's words and saying, I will sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will sweep away both man and beast. I will sweep away the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea and the idols that cause the wicked to stumble. God sends this picture, and it goes on like that. I'm not going to go through the whole chapter, but it doesn't get any better from those early verses. And God sends this prophet Zephaniah. It must have been a tough job for him to do this, to paint this picture of this could we say, a potential future or a theoretical future for the people of Israel and indeed for the world, and we'll look at that in a moment. And I think what Zephaniah is doing here and what God is doing through the prophet Zephaniah is he's painting a picture of the future reality that we choose when we sin and when we walk out on God. When we sin, however small we think the sin is, however small we think the rebellion is against God, God is saying, through this prophet, and Zephaniah is saying, do you know, when you take one step on that path away from me, this is the future that you in your heart are willing and deciding. And there's a few descriptions of the sin of God's people here. In verse 4, God says, I will stretch my hand out against Judah and all who live in Jerusalem. I will destroy every remnant of Baal worship in this place. That was Baal worship, was where they were bowing down to statues. They were bowing down to things that they had made and that they thought were wonderful in their lives. They thought that Baal, the god Baal, controlled the weather. And if they wanted it to rain, they would find a stick in the woods somewhere, and they would chop it in half, and they would use half of it for firewood, and the other half they would fashion into an idol, and they would say, if we bow down to this idol and call it Baal, we will get the rain and the weather that we need. And however ridiculous that sounds to us, it was offensive to God, and it was one step down towards this path where they had completely lost all knowledge of God and all relationship with him, where God in fact had wiped them out of existence. Imagine what it must be like to bow down and to worship something that you know has been made by human hands. And we might say how ridiculous, but there are those, aren't there, who depend on and worship and live for their cars, their houses, their gardens. You know, to worship something is only just to say, this is the thing that I live for. This is the thing that I depend on. That if I lost this thing in my life, I would not be able to carry on. And actually, the truth is, we are all idol worshippers, aren't we? We all worship things we all have a propensity in our hearts to worship things that are made, rather than to worship the Creator. As Paul Simon puts in his song, The Sound of Silence, and the people bowed and prayed to a neon god they made. What's he talking about? He's talking probably about television and media, isn't he? And how that good thing can easily become a God thing, the thing we live for, the thing we depend on, the thing we gather around, that glowing box that gives us so much information and so much entertainment. And that's just one example of modern idol worship. And then he talks about, in verse 5, those who bow down on the roofs to worship the starry host, those who look up into the sky at night and see how wonderful it is, as I often do, but then decide that instead of worshipping the God who made those things, to worship the stars themselves. And to say, stars, you are the ones that determine the path of my life. Stars, wherever you position yourselves in the sky, that tells me how my life is going to go. That's a form of idol worship. And the dystopian picture, the bleak and horrible future that Zephaniah paints here, is God taking the sinful decisions out of our own hearts, and he's saying, look, this is the path that this takes you down. This is the path that this takes you down. God's sending this warning. This is what you are choosing when you reject me. You are rejecting life, and this is the world that you build when you decide to go against me. This is a vision of life that the human heart and will chooses when we sin. Maybe blindly, but nevertheless willingly. And this picture, it gets worse. It's a global dystopia. And the message is clearly, guys, sin is disastrous. Sin is disastrous. This is not God saying, I'm going to send God saying, I'm going to send disaster on you. I'm going to send terrible things on you. This is God saying, this is where you are. This is where you are walking. And you know, our Creator has built cause and effect into this world. And we know cause and effect very well. You talk to environmental campaigners. What will they tell you? They will tell you this is a cause and effect situation, that we are polluting the world. That God has not created a world where you can abuse the environment as much as you want, and just continue to live the life that you want. That if you abuse the planet, then you are going to reap a bitter harvest. God has kind of built judgment into this world. That what we put in is what we get out. We reap what we sow. If we sow abuse into our planet, then we will reap a bitter harvest. If you hunt species out of existence, the populations of all the world's creatures will be under threat. If you make sure, in an interpersonal level, if you make sure that you win every argument at all costs, if you make sure you get your own way in every situation, you will lose friendships and you will lose the very fabric of human existence. If you go to war with one another, you will end up being destroyed yourself. It's all the way through the Bible, isn't it? It's all the way through creation. We see it in us. And that's what Zephaniah is doing here. That's what God's doing through this prophet. He's saying, he's holding up this awful future to the human race, and he's saying, this is where you're going. God clearly takes the way we live very personally. And he's saying, this is what you're building, humanity. People often ask, don't they, why doesn't God do something about human sinfulness and the result of it? Why doesn't he just wipe out all the baddies? And the answer from this prophecy is, if God wiped out all the baddies, we'd all be wiped out. If God just ended all suffering, then he would have to end all those who inflict suffering, and he would have to end us. That's what this prophecy is saying. In chapter 2, there's a list of all the nations that surround Judah. In verses 1 to 4 of chapter 2, you've got God talking to Judah. And he's saying, if you have to face God in his fierce anger, then you're going to be wiped out. If I do what you think I should do, which is wipe out all the bad guys, then you're for it as well. And then God points to nations in the west, verses 4 to 7. He talks to Philistia, to Gaza, to the nations all in the west. And then in verses 8 to 11, he points to Moab and to Ammon, all the nations in the east. And then in verse 12 onwards, he talks to Cush, all the nations in the south. And then he talks to Assyria in the north, verses 13 to 15. And this isn't just Zephaniah pointing to the specific nations around Judah where he's standing. We can imagine Zephaniah is standing in Judah and he's pointing to the entire globe, north, south, east, west. And he's saying, all of you, global judgment is coming. If you want a God who comes in and deals with sin at face value, if you want a God who comes in and deals with this world as it should be dealt with according to human reasoning, then this is what you get. You get a global dystopia. And nobody is safe. Which of you in the world can speak against this? When we take up that impulse to control in our own hearts, to have things our own way, to make sure that people are viewed in the way we think they should be viewed. When we make sure that nobody gets in our way of what we want. This global dystopia that's described in Zephaniah is what we are moving towards. But the good news is this isn't what God does, is it? This global dystopia that's described here in these verses has never happened, and the promise of the Bible is it will never happen. The annihilation of the human race is not going to happen. And aren't you glad God doesn't just come and put an end to all suffering? Because this is what it would look like if he did. And instead, secondly, I want us to notice that instead God has sent an awesome king. God has sent an awesome king. Instead of sending the world down this path of global disaster according to the sin that we wreak on one another, and according to this global devastation that we put on one another, and according to this picture that Zephaniah puts in front of us, in fact, God is holding this back all the time. God sends this prophet Zephaniah, and he speaks to us in his word here, and he says, look, this is what I'm holding you back from. The God who seems to not do anything about your sin, the God who seems to not do anything about all the evil in the world, actually, this is what I'm protecting you from. there is a hand holding all of this back. This prophecy that Zephaniah is talking about, this potential future, it is not happening. It's being withheld. Chapter 3, verse 8, God says, "Therefore, wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day I will stand up to testify. I've decided to assemble the nations, to gather the kingdoms, to pour out my wrath on them, or my fierce anger. The whole world will be consumed by the fire of my jealous anger." This is the culmination of the picture that Zephaniah is painting, and it's awful. It's a picture of an angry, vengeful God. I mean, we mustn't be deceived here. This is not God saying, "This is who I am." This is God saying, very often, this is who you're asking for. And in that picture of God, that's nobody's safe. Because then suddenly it all changes. Look at chapter 3, verse 9. And this is where the sun breaks through the storm clouds. We want a God who comes in his anger, who agrees with us about the anger against the sin of all those others. But that's not what God does. Instead, God comes in and he moves into the neighborhood and he sends an awesome king. In verse 9, it all changes. He says, "I will purify the lips of the peoples, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder." These previously warring nations who were tearing each other to pieces in this prophecy, now suddenly, when God moves in, God is saying, when I move in, guys, it is not going to be to destroy you all. When I move in, it is going to be to redeem you all and to bring you back together. This is a wonderful prophecy. Having said, this is what you're asking for when you ask me to come in and intervene and just wipe out all the evil out of the world. He then turns around and says, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to change your hearts. I'm going to change your minds. I'm going to move into the neighborhood. And I'm going to be a mighty savior in your midst. The good news of the Bible is that Zephaniah chapter 1 and 2, whilst that might be what we're calling out for, is not what God is going to do. No, what God is going to do and what he has done by sending his awesome King, the Son, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. No, wonderfully, the King that they have that we reject and we neglect has moved close to us, and he has come to be among us. Verse 15, starting verse 14 of Zephaniah chapter 3. "Sing, daughter Zion, shout aloud, Israel, be glad and rejoice with all your heart, daughter Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away your punishment. He has turned back your enemy. The Lord, the King of Israel, is with you. Never again will you fear any harm." When God walks onto the stage, it is not to say, "I'm going to get you." It's to say, don't be afraid. Worship and rejoice. I'm a savior. Isn't that good news? God has rejected the solution that we so often call for. Come down, God, and end all the suffering. No. Wipe out all these evil people. No. I'm going to come and I'm going to move in. And I'm going to be your savior. I'm going to come and I'm going to identify with you in your sin. And there was a day, wasn't there, where the king came, this awesome king that Zephaniah prophesied came about 500 or 600 years later. And this king took on the form of a servant and took on this devastation, this picture, took it on himself. That which the human race cries out for, God came and took on himself. Verse 17, "The Lord your God is with you, not against you, but with you. The mighty warrior who saves." Not the mighty warrior who judges, not the mighty warrior who comes in vengeance, but the mighty warrior who saves. We must be very careful when we talk about a God of vengeance, because the Bible doesn't talk about him in that way, not if you read very carefully. And this is the picture of God that the Bible gives us. That while we might be expecting a God who's going to come in vengeance, who's going to wipe people out, who's going to destroy people, but But no, when the awesome King came, he hung on a cross for us. And he got up on that cross, and you know the scene, don't you? They climb up and they hammer a sign above his head which says, "The King of the Jews." Zephaniah prophesied it. In verse 15, "The Lord, the King of Israel, is with you." Where is he? Is he on a throne? Is he riding a war horse to come and destroy everyone? No. He's hanging on a cross to suffer and to die with us, to live for those few hours that dystopian picture that we were building. And you see, as he does so, he shields us and he holds us. And he holds back the full consequences of our sinful inclinations. And so here's the answer to the question: why doesn't God do something about all of this? Why doesn't God wipe out all the evil from the face of the earth? The answer is, he has done something about it. He's joined us and he's taken it on himself. And then thirdly, I want us to notice, having thought about an awesome dystopia and an awesome king who came to live life alongside us, I want to notice thirdly, an awesome utopia. A utopia is the opposite of a dystopia. Now suddenly everything is good. However we defined dystopia earlier, this is the opposite. That everything is being healed, that everything is going somewhere good, that everything is going towards to perfection and peace and to wholeness. And in verses 16 and 17, here is the reality of what it is to be part of God's kingdom, to be in the kingdom of this king. It is to realize that God is not coming in judgment. It is to realize that the king did come and he didn't execute judgment in that way globally. But instead he took it on himself. It was the first thing that Jesus said when he rose from the dead. The first thing he said to his disciples, the first thing the angels said to the ladies in the tomb and those visitors to the empty tomb: don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. That's awesome, isn't it? That the human race crushed the Son of God to death, that the Son of God, Yahweh in the flesh, drowned in his own spit because we pinned him to a cross of wood. And he rises again, he defeats death, and he comes to us, the human race, those who had denied him, those who had run away from him, even some of those who had killed him, and he turns round and he says, "Do not be afraid. You gave me death, and I give you life." Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 16, "Do not let your hands hang limp." Raise your hands in worship. Raise your hands in praise when you have understood who God is, when you have understood who the awesome King is. Worship and praise with your whole body, with your hands and your heart and your voice raised up to heaven in worship and praise, because now this awesome God who you feared, who you wrongly feared, is with you. And that mighty warrior who you imagined would come in vengeance and spilling blood has come with love. Verse 17, the mighty warrior is with you. Church, the mighty warrior is with you. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And this wonderful scene, some of the most wonderful words in all of the Bible that we could ever find. Look at this. This is how we are in God's presence. Now, Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 17. He will take great delight in you. In his love, he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Guys, we can put that dystopia to the back of our minds. We can forget all about it, because that's not the God that we have. And the intention of the prophecy of Zephaniah is to say, this is who I am. And church, this is who we are. And if you've come to faith in Jesus Christ, if you have come to trust the awesome King who came and moved into this world with us and came and put an end to our dystopian future, then this is who you are in God's presence right now. No matter what you're feeling about yourself, no matter what other people might be saying about you, no matter what you might be thinking about the future right now, God, the creator of the universe, because of our awesome King Jesus, is looking down on you and he is singing songs of joy. He is not seeing our sin. He has not seen the dystopian future that our choices are making. No. If we are trusting in the awesome King, then he is only seeing beauty. And he is only seeing things that make his heart lift with joy and with wonder, with delight. Did you know, Christian, that this very evening, no matter what you've done today, or no matter how your week has been, and this will be the same tomorrow and all the way into eternity, did you know that when God looks at you, he only sees beauty and he only takes delight, and he only loves? This is the truth that changes us. This is the truth that gives us the strength and the ability and the desire to truly change. If you're one of those people who is constantly threatening yourself or being threatened with a God who is angry, with a God who is hostile, with a God who is going to one day smash us, then you're not reading the Bible. You're not reading the prophecy of Zephaniah. And you're not hearing from the God of the Bible. You're hearing from somewhere else. The God of the Bible says, trust the King, and I will delight in you, and I will sing over you, and I will rejoice over you. One day our bodies will pass away. And on that day when our bodies pass away, we will open our eyes in God's presence. And he will turn to us and he will say, oh, it's you. I was just singing about you. Welcome home. Church, be blessed. Can't wait to see you again.